Hey, Glenn, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. You were about to think something.
No.
Okay. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Glenn Loury of Brown University.
I am John McWhorter. I teach as an adjunct at Columbia, contributing editor for The New Republic, among other places.
That's complicated, John. When you gonna get a day job, man?
Well, we'll see. I'll be announcing that actually sooner than a lot of us think. We'll see.
Oh, I was teasing you. Oh, have you got something in the works? Okay, we're all waiting with bated breath.
We shall see. But for now, I am a humble freelancer. But still trying to keep up with things. What's on our minds today?
John, we're the black guys talking about race again, it would appear.
Well,
no, it's the Cornel West criticizing the president, conflicts and controversy on the left. President is a black mascot of Wall Street oligarchs and a black puppet of corporate plutocrats who is not comfortable in the company of free black men, being of that Kansas white stock, mostly been around white, Jewish, high-performing people that he feels comfortable with. Kind of stuff like that. That's what I thought we were...
Yeah. I don't think we can resist talking about that. And,
so, there's been a lot of ink spilt, a lot of vituperation on the internet and on cable television about it.
It's hard. I try not to write about Cornel West. I did 10 years ago after the incident at Harvard where then President Larry Summers asked him to start reporting to him on actual academic work rather than some of the things that he was doing. And Cornel West was highly offended, and he decamped to Princeton. And I didn't love that because I thought that the proper response would be to say to Summers, I am doing academic work, and to enumerate what it was, and to do it, and to prove that the charges had been incorrect. And instead, Cornel West just turned tail. So I did criticize that. And that's about all I've said since then, because I don't like picking fights with individuals unless it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, hold on, John. Do you think our Blogging Heads audience, should we assume that everybody knows who Cornel West is? He's just that famous?
I would assume it, but do we want to give a thumbnail?
Well, I will do so. Cornel West, professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, formerly university professor in the Department of African American Studies at Harvard University, who is a philosopher and a theologian and a popular writer on issues of social ethics and race, and is also a celebrity. He has appeared in the Matrix movies and has, you see him on Bill Maher and other such places. He has a very high public profile and a very distinctive persona, manner of self-presentation, way of talking and carrying himself. Involved with President Obama's campaign in 2008 and recently very publicly criticizing the president. And as you had mentioned, also his departure from Harvard University and its controversy in which very publicly the president of the university had, in fact, reprimanded him for doing insufficiently much academic work and too much popular and public intellectual work.
Oh, the calling card book is probably Race Matters.
Race Matters, which was 1992 or 93, if I'm not mistaken.
One of those, yeah.
Which became a bestseller.
Huge bestseller, yeah. Translated
in the aftermath of the civil disturbances in Los Angeles.
Exactly.
Translated me. But he's also been a subject of other, I've been involved in other kind of writing projects and such, including a memoir written recently, the title of which I can't recall now.
Living Out Loud?
Living Out Loud,
right.
Which was interesting for, amongst other reasons, that he had a ghostwriter.
Yeah, he didn't actually.
On his memoir, which did raise some eyebrows some places. So this is Cornel West. So how do we begin?
Well, you know what? And it's one of those things, you hate to say it, but this statement that he made about the president, I have a hard time thinking of it as something that an intellectual would say. And what I mean by that is that it has so little to do with just empirical reality. What he's doing in saying that because Obama was raised by a white mother and was close to white grandparents, that he's not comfortable, and this is the statement, with free black men, that he's more comfortable with, quote unquote, white and Jewish and smart people. To say that about Obama, not only is it mean. Mean would be okay. Sometimes life is mean, but more to the point, it's just wrong. I mean, this is the person who, has Michelle Robinson as a wife, and who was a member in a church that was decidedly not white or Jewish, and who I think definitely has adopted, for a long time, a membership in what we might call the black community. And so it sounds like Cornel West is talking about a different person, isn't he?
Okay, I don't disagree with anything that you said, but what I want to say, rather than responding directly to the question you put, is to say that let's consider the context, and just want to emphasize, I don't disagree with anything that you just said, John. Let's consider the context within which these remarks were made. So, Cornel West is being interviewed by one Chris Hedges, if I'm not mistaken, for a website called Truth Dig, if I'm not mistaken. Hedges comes to Cornel West's office, and they evidently have a protracted conversation. West has, in the weeks preceding, been saying publicly things critical of Obama's policies, and that they are insufficiently attentive to the working and poor. I mean, basically, this is what West is saying.
It's not the first time, right?
He says it to Al Sharpton in a way by way of criticizing Al Sharpton for getting too close to the president. The president had recently spoken at Sharpton's outfit on some event in New York City, and West was saying that Sharpton was becoming too chummy with the president and not being the prophetic voice that the president needed to hear, criticizing the president for not doing enough for the poor and for working people. So this is West's lament. And it's as he's expressing his lament at great and excruciating length, and embarrassing length, and unguardedness and silliness, in my opinion. As he's expressing his lament, he allows himself this that you've quoted, which is basically Obama's got a problem with black men. He's got some identity issues. Bottom line is he may not be all that authentic. I mean, you can understand it. The brother, this is West. This is the voice of West. The brother growing up out there in Kansas, out there in Hawaii, got that Hawaii influence, got that white grandparent influence, So when he's confronted with a free black brother, this is West waxing eloquent and, as I say, silly and self-destructively in his office. But I say all of this just to say, John, that I don't want it to be a Jeremiah Wright kind of conversation about Cornel West, wherein we simply say he said something that was outrageous, which I don't disagree with again, and we don't ever consider, sort of as it were, where he was coming from, what he was saying, what's right or wrong about what he's saying.
Sure.
I think there's much that can be said that's critical of what he's saying, But yes, having said all of that, I will agree with you that it is not an accurate description of Barack Hussein Obama, at least not the one that I've gotten to know through his march to the presidency and his performance therein. To say that he ain't black. Brother look black to me.
And you know something? It's
walk black, talk black, acts black, marries black, plays basketball black.
And if
he's black enough for me.
Me too. Although if Cornel West had said that about some people, and I'm going to take it right home here, I don't think it wouldn't be fair to say that he couldn't say that about anybody. Frankly, I think he sounds like he's talking about somebody like, me. I mean, if I were the one who was putting myself out there like that, could say, and I know he's not talking about me, but, me with my Jewish wife, and, frankly, I do have an amount of Jewish friends that is not proportional.
An inordinate number of Jewish friends. This is a deep offense.
And if somebody said that about me, I would think it was mean, but I would not say, what do they mean by that? What do they mean about rootedness in black culture? I mean, you might want to go there, but it doesn't work for Obama.
Let me tell you what I think. We're going to be talking about Cornel West, and I just want to say a couple of things out front. One of them is, I think that identity politics and multiculturalism are coming to the end of their string, and this may be a little bit of what the unraveling looks like. Okay, that's point one. That's, all of this race stuff, okay? I'm as guilty of it as the next man. I'm a race man myself. I teach courses on race. I write books about race. But, in the 21st century, with the Chinese economy and the war on terror and the banks and the Middle East and everything, somehow the race card has got a squeaky, small, silly little sound to it. And I think that's one of the themes here.
That was well put. Yeah.
Another theme, though, that I think is that Obama has to govern from the center. There's just not any way you can be president and be a critic of the structures of power and the basic way the society is organized. That's just inconceivable. Mm-hmm. And yet, many people have invested him, and let's leave Obama out of this for the time being. People have, invested his ascendancy, the symbolism of it, with counter-cultural, counter-political cultural, counter-narrative content. Obama's not going to do it the way that, they're dissatisfied with basic alignments in the structures of power in the American nation state. Deeply dissatisfied with the relative influence of the financial sector, let's say, on our government. Deeply dissatisfied with the militaristic posture of our, deployment of force throughout the world and the, causes on behalf of which we deploy neo-colonial causes, that is. People who are deeply dissatisfied with a lot of structures in American society saw in Obama an opening, something that was supposed to happen. And it's just not feasible for any president, who is president, to be that agent of counter-narrative, counter-political culture, counter-structures of power. He can't do it. And so there's a kind of, deep contradiction or incompatibility in the politics of people on the left. Their politics are screwed because they can't get there from here. If where they want to get is, where we, if you will, want to get is real restructuring, real change, real reordering, maybe you can't get there by electing, quote unquote, the first black president. I mean, maybe that's just a silly thought in the whole thing. So there's something futile in my mind about the way that he says he's a mascot of corporate plutocrats and that he is a puppet of Wall Street oligarchs. I mean, who else is the president of the United States going to be but a booster for American capitalism? I mean, it's just not conceivable that a president could be anything other than a buddy of the people who run the economy.
Oh, of course.
So to call him a black mascot and a black puppet is just to be confused about politics.
It is confused, and it is squeaky and small in the grand scheme of things when we analyze what Barack Obama has been all about in terms of his time in office and what the issues have been. The notion that anybody would look at all that's happened over the past few years at this point and to see the proper analysis to be that the president wasn't being properly African American is definitely not going to stand the test of time. And it's certainly why I have avoided writing very much about this over the past few weeks, because it does seem tinny. It sounds like someone who perhaps is not really attending to the larger nature of things. I mean, think about it just randomly. David Remnick's book about the Barack Obama phenomenon and all that takes in. And then here we are with a former university professor, somebody who's treated as a serious intellectual and as a prophet, quote unquote, who looks at what Barack Obama is doing and saying that he's not blacking properly. It's small, and frankly, I find it rather lazy. And as far as the left and what they read into somebody for being black, I think that Herman Cain, who is this up-and-coming presence on the right, is going to teach America even more about the multiplicity of being black, because nobody could say that he's not really black either. I think there'd be even less of a problem there.
Oh, and he's not the only one, by the way. There's the Congressman West from Florida,
him too. That's
who's
Alan West,
American Tea Party favorite, and there are others as well, I'm sure.
Scott, these are people who are going to teach us quite a bit about black and politics and even prophecy. And I think that the idea that Obama is wrong for not somehow living out this fantasy of running the country on the basis of what, quote-unquote, free black men of the kind that Cornel West and Michael Eric Dyson put their arms around. That idea, it's fantasy, it's small, it's recreational, and it's really sad to see it. It's just sad to see it, if you ask.
Okay, so here I want to inject into our conversation another note, if I may. We are in agreement both on the point that multiculturalism unravels, those were my words, but, the kind of overemphasis on race in the 21st century and the kind of smallness of that angle of vision, and also on the sort of larger political point that you can't really expect the president of the United States to be the leader of a kind of anti-colonial, hegemonic, anti-capitalist. That's a confusion about how that works. But there's another thing here that I wanted to, because I'm not without some sympathy somewhere in the back of my mind for this agony that I think Cornel West is representing. And he's seeing the he thinks sorry, John. I think. Let me not put these words in Cornel West's mouth. But I'm just suspecting that it might be something like this. I think that the history of the struggle of African Americans has meaning for reforming and disciplining and holding to right the conduct of American power and the organization of American society, that it points us towards some higher ground. Mm-hmm. There's something in that, okay? Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a flawed human being, of course, but a great man and a great American. Mm-hmm. And he points and he leads, and all of that, all of the narrative about that, okay, and the anti-slavery people, the Underground Railroad, and the Frederick Douglass, and the nobility of the freedmen, and the anti-lynching advocacy of the NAACP, and the intellectuality of the W.E.B. Du Bois, and the heroic communism of the Paul Ropes, and yes, I'll even go there, and on, that the outsiderness, okay, I'm not going to make a whole sermon here, but I'm just going to say the outsiderness of the African American, the kind of nose against the candy store window, not quite allowed in. So you don't drink the Kool-Aid, you don't believe the hype a little bit. I mean, the city on the hill narrative of America, the perfect leader of the free and whatever. I mean, we know from the seamy underside of racism and Jim Crow, we know from the mean streets of the ghetto city, et cetera, et cetera. So that aspect of the black experience, this is the African American experience in America, mm-hmm. as distinct from, let's say, the immigrant Italian experience in America, the immigrant Greek or Armenian experience in America, the immigrant Russian Jewish experience, the immigrant Irish experience. Okay, so there is a there, mm-hmm. okay, in terms of the gritty, substantive, hard-fought, deeply felt sensibilities about the politics and the sort of pointing toward justice, pointing toward higher ground. Now, Cornel West mistakenly believes that Barack Obama, in virtue of his African-Americanness and in virtue of his having run a campaign filled with the hope, invested with the hopes of so many African-Americans, Barack Obama doesn't get the nomination in the Democratic Party if the African-Americans don't turn out in a large number. Barack Obama doesn't win without inspiring, and it's, of course, not only the African-American coalitions, other coalitions, the gay or the Latino or the youth or the whatever, mm-hmm. people who are concerned about the future of the planet. All of these things, people have a counter to the structure, and they think, Obama's going to do it. And so this is where West's disappointment is coming from. And he feels, and I feel, I will own this, that to a certain degree, the kind of integrity of that tradition of protest against the mainstream of American political tendency is diminished somewhat by its being ever so much assimilated to the office of the president in the person of Barack Hussein Obama. Mm-hmm. Just by virtue of occupying that office, he makes normal the exercise of American power that does actually draw lines and put people to different sides of it. That is, to some degree, neo-colonial and militaristic, and that is inconsistent with values of equity and fairness and justice in terms of social arrangements, whether it's our prisons, our ghettos, or whatever it might be. And so that Obama kind of assimilates some of this legacy of African-American struggle to, and normalizes it, and sort of brings it into the house and domesticates it, is something that I think a person like Cornel West or even a person like Glenn Loury are, concerned about, and I think we have reason to.
One of the ironies of the Civil Rights Revolution is that what it freed us to be was normal, and normal includes not only excellent, but mediocre and compromising. And that's a tough one. And I can certainly understand, I can put myself in Cornel West's head and see where he's coming from. We've come a long way from the Grant Park speech. And there are places where Obama certainly could have done better in the eyes of many of us. He's not perfect in terms of what a good liberal may have been. But it seems to me, and I hope I don't seem too waspish on this, that what the Civil Rights Revolution was for, and with the inevitable notion that there is a certain moral authority that emanates from the black experience, perfectly understandable. That didn't mean that in 2011, someone can say something with a passionate black cadence from the left, and that automatically that must somehow be prophetic or correct or useful. I think that we have a responsibility to be as diligent as we can. And as far as what West is thinking, and what West is thinking is that there's going to be, for example, a jobs program. Many of us are wishing that we could go back to what happened in the 1930s. But the thing is, there are, and I'm sure you're quite aware of them, arguments for and against whether we would have a jobs program like that that are involved. They've been discussed here on Logging Heads, for example. And I'm not sure that I see in these very charismatic comments from Professor West any engagement with the actual details and what Obama could or couldn't have done here in the real world. Instead, we're just having this prophecy, this charisma, these intonations. And as far as the tinniness and the whole racial rhetoric getting tired, I think part of it is that a lot of us are beginning to realize that the music of your voice and the way you move when you talk and how you wear your hair, etc., those things do not constitute argument. And I'm disappointed that this prophecy is not based on more detailed engagement.
Well, I think you're making a very strong point here, John. I really do. We started out saying we were going to talk about Cornel West, and we haven't really kind of gotten to that except to, parse these particular comments that he made. I mean, the larger arc of his career, and was Larry Summers right back at Harvard and all that kind of stuff. But just let me say this. Cornel, so yes, bandying about a lot of words and not talking about policy, and not being explicit and concrete in the alternative courses that you think, based on your study or your knowledge of your expertise, your command of the policy arena and the issues, what the president might otherwise have done, and so on. And West doesn't do that. He just calls names, and he sort of stands on some higher ground above the details and just says we ought to have been more committed to whatever. And that's clearly inadequate. But, the truth is, Cornel West doesn't know anything about these matters in any detail. And I say that with respect for him. I mean, I actually think he knows a lot about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't know anything about finance, Wall Street, oligarchs, and corporate plutocrats. West is on a tear because Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner got invited into the Oval Office to counsel the president on the economic affairs of state, as if it was self-evident that Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner, being close to Wall Street, are bad people. Right. Well, what I want to know is, if this is not going to be McCarthyism, and that's a strong word, if it's not just going to be name-calling, what is it about Larry Summers' thought in terms of, financial market regulation, in terms of, the relevant importance of stimulus versus austerity in fiscal budgets, in terms of, whether or not the Chinese currency is underpriced and what should be the posture of the U.S. in the trade negotiations, in terms of is he committed to Keynesianism, to Hayekianism, to Milton Friedmanism, whatever. In other words, Larry Summers can't just be a bad person because he has friends on Wall Street. He has to be a bad person because he has ideas that are bad. But in order to criticize Larry Summers, you have to actually know something about those ideas. Yeah. Okay? Now, West says that Joseph Stiglitz or Paul Krugman might have been better people to counsel the president. Mm-hmm. And that may be true. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But neither does he.
No, I don't think he does.
Okay? Yeah. That's really the point. So it's like a loyalty test. It's like he's asking me to line up. Now, I'll tell you something. I had my misgivings when I heard that the president was going to make Larry Summers his chief economic counsel in the White House. And I said to a friend at the time, the president has put Larry Summers in charge of the money. And I was disappointed. As a professional economist, I'd like to think that I have somewhat of a substantive basis upon which to base that disappointment. Right. And I'd like to think that I could actually name some alternative people, as I could name, whom the president might have turned to and might have turned to get some of that advice. But and I'm not extolling myself in any way except to say, if you're going to criticize the president for policy, you have to know something about policy.
I would think, or you should try, and it's not 20 years ago. You don't have to go to the library. You can just go online. You can spend a half hour, an hour a day learning some things that you didn't know before. And as far as I'm concerned, then you can base your prophecy on that, and you can intone it in that certain way with the gestures, etc. But I think that one has a responsibility to do a certain amount of homework, and especially if you're going to say something as trenchant as "you're not authentically black" to the nation's first black president, or really to any black person. And you know what else? And you know what else? A quick thing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the fact, this is something that I realize, I'm always a little late. I realized this last week. What is this business about Twitter debate? Yeah, a lot of the whole debate over what Cornel West said has apparently been taking place in 140-character exchanges. I'm not doing the Twitter thing yet. And
I don't do it. I'm sorry, I'm behind the time, and I don't follow it very close. I hear about it indirectly.
And I'm always in favor of cherishing oral expression and casual expression. It's not that I think that there's anything wrong with Twitter, and I've been defending it in various places lately, including on theroot.com. But hold on, this notion that professors are having quote-unquote debates in little tiny sound bites on purpose. So it's not that people are saying long things and then getting clipped improperly. It's that people with PhDs are tapping these little 140-character messages, and then that's being reported on as intelligent exchange. Part of the reason I haven't jumped in on the Cornel West thing was because I thought if people are talking about it on Twitter, then it must not be important. But then last week I discovered that that's now considered substantial debate. Am I being an old man in this, or is there something?
Probably a little bit, and I'm in there with you because I'm not a devotee, and there probably is a world out there. I mean, time is scarce, and there are various different ways that you can communicate. They would say this is not a substitute for a more considered discussion or deliberation, but this is one way. And then they have followers, and so there's a community, and I don't,
140 characters. I mean, mark my words, and maybe I'll have to eat my hat in a couple of years. I am not going to be engaging in any kind of political debate with that. I mean, I'll talk to my friends on it.
Well, there's a larger kind of, this came up in my conversation with my friend Rajiv Sethi, who teaches at Barnard College at Columbia, who's a blogger, and he does economics blogging, which is to say he writes not 140 characters. I mean,
blogging
it might be 1,000 words, or 800 words or something like that, but it's not a journal article published in a refereed professional journal. And the discussion that we were having was whether at some point in time academic departments wouldn't come to consider work that people might do in this blogging modality as creditable
as real,
whether they should get tenure or promoted or whatever.
It's getting to that point,
and he was advocating that, and I was resisting it, okay? And I was saying, gee, we don't know. What about the vetting? Referees at the journals. I mean, they assure us that the stuff is of high quality. Just sort of anybody can say anything. And then he was saying, well, there is vetting. It's not as if there's not any vetting. It just works in a different way. And he was saying, the fact that anybody can say anything is not such a bad thing. Why should you have like a dozen referees being the gatekeepers about who can say
with all the bias involved in that?
Exactly. And there are all the corruptions and, nepotisms and all the things that emerge in that. Yeah. So it was, I think, and the more that people who are doing research communities are also communicating with each other about substantive research questions via that.
It's happening in linguistics,
the more you have to say that to the extent that a person made themselves a real influential presence in that medium and were over a period of time shown to be, good contributors who were able to stimulate fruitful dialogue amongst professionals and advance the ball. I don't see why you don't credit it at the end. So I think things are going to change, and who's to know when they're going to come out. But the idea that Twitter conversation amongst intellectuals might be about substantive matters might be taken seriously. Is not.
I get the blogs, but 140 characters, no. I mean, if you can't even sustain the arc of an argument in a medium, and you can do that with blogs, but with 140 characters, you can't even make an extended argument. I'm old. I mean, I'm officially elderly on that one.
Well, okay, I want to go back to Cornel West.
Okay.
Now I want to forget about his ill-considered comments about the president, and I want to talk about the Larry Summers controversy, because the Globe up here in Boston ran a little op-ed
recently,
right after the news broke about West's interview and his unfortunate remarks about the president, saying in effect Larry Summers was right.
No.
That's basically what it says. So you remember what Larry Summers tried to say something to this guy?
Somebody said that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the thing I want to get at here is standards. Okay?
You're really going to go here, aren't you?
Yeah, well, yeah.
All right, all right.
I am. I mean, university professor.
Yeah.
Okay, that's supposed to mean something.
Yeah.
Now, I've been having this ongoing discussion with a very close, it's my wife.
It's your wife, yeah.
She would not mind me saying her name here because she's proud of her view. And her view is that she's very disappointed with Brother Cornel West. In particular, and there are others, but he's one. I'm talking to Michael Eric Dyson's of the world. Whenever they come on the television, she turns the television off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? They sicken her to her stomach. Okay? So they come on with this black performative self-presentation, which is the tone of voice, the facial expression, the preacherly gesture, the dramatic, okay? So they come on with that. Now, that's shtick, okay? Now, she's willing to take that. But what she objects to is the fact that there's no there that's down underneath. It's all rhetorical, and it's all posturing, and there's no real analytical depth. Now, I think that's, and I put these words in my wife's mouth, I think that's an overstatement. I don't think there's an absence completely.
Mm-hmm.
But there is, it's not what you want. You know, it's not the kind of solidity. University professor at Harvard University, that's the kind of stuff that, you know, historian Bernard Balin, you know, or, you know, B.F. Skinner,
mm-hmm.
or John Rawls,
Oh, yeah.
you know, Amartya Sen.
Yes.
You know, when you say these names, bookshelves appear in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Substantial, generations-long influence on scholars laboring in neighboring vineyards from the fruit and the creative effort within the context of the academy. That's what you associate with university professor at Harvard.
Yeah.
Okay? For a black person, this is my wife, to be holding that position and not to be exemplifying the highest degree of execution of excellence and accomplishment and influence
mm-hmm.
in that realm is a travesty. Full stop. Okay. So that's the case against Cornel West and his ilk.
Mm-hmm.
That they pretend to something which is precious and sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Walking in the inner sanctum of the highest of the academe.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, being African Americans, and being the first African Americans to stride into that rarefied air, they're not pulling their weight. They're not doing the deal. They've got a shtick. They got an act. They found a way of playing it instead of actually doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I want to put, that's one side. Now I want to put the other side. Okay, the other side, this is about standards, and this is what really interests me. I have a view. I'll tell you my view at the end. But that my wife said, now the other side, which I argue devil's advocate with her, is they're going to say it's a different way of doing it. They're going to say the 21st century is not the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to say that the demands of their time, their public intellectuals engage with the currents and the courses, in touch with the whatever, informed by all of the great books or whatever, but, you know, Cornel's going to tell us about the labor union halls that he's been in and the political campaigns and the meetings with organizers
mm-hmm.
and the church basements that he's been in. And he's going to see himself as, you know, with his rap video thing and his joint projects on this or that and the various interviews that he allows to be published. He's going to say, I'm being an intellectual of my time, and I'm facing up to my responsibilities, choosing to do the way. And who's to say which is better? Larry Summers shuttling back and forth to Wall Street to his hedge fund and running Harvard in the inner sanctum, trying to preserve the same dealings of the last 200 years, or me, a global intellectual. He's going to have a story to justify his alternative way of conducting the office of university professor. And it's not obvious what the ground is on which I would defend my judgment, which is that Linda, my wife, is basically right, which is that there is an objective standard of excellence for the academy, which does not include going on Bill Maher's real-time television
mm-hmm.
show.
Mm-hmm.
Always sitting around in airport lobbies, waiting to give interviews on the fly to journalists, tossing off 1,000-word op-ed pieces, and never actually sustaining over the long, the bitter, the hard,
mm-hmm.
The months and the years that it takes of applying oneself in order to craft something of excellence and lasting value.
Mm-hmm.
That there are real differences, and that Larry Summers on that is right.
Yeah, this is hard. I think you and I both try to do a balance of those things. Like I have an academic anthology coming out, I think, now on linguistics, and it's interesting. You can't do as much of the hardcore academic stuff if you're doing a heavy-duty public career as Cornel West is. I would certainly respect that. But I want to read something, and I don't usually do this, and I find this a very painful topic, so I'm trying to be careful. But I wrote something 10 years ago about him. I'm going to, just a very short passage. I wrote about the Harvard thing. This is in my book, Authentically Black. I said, nothing better demonstrated the distorted view of what black intellect is about than that, in fact, when West was confronted by Summers, he was actually working on 3 academic books. This was staggering. The simple question is why West didn't mention this to the New York Times or in his interview with Tavis Smiley. To take another alternate universe scenario, when Summers suggested that West return to genuine scholarship, he would simply have responded that he was just then engaged in such work, felt it as a private triumph, and not have alerted the media to the encounter at all. My prime disappointment is that I said that 10 years ago, giving West the benefit of the doubt that by this time, 2011, there would be 3 hardcore academic books. And you know, Glenn, there aren't. He hasn't done that, and I don't hear that there are any plans for it. And you know, I would say, as far as an answer to the question that you threw out as to what you would say to the detractors, the church basement is important, and I think that the kind of intellectual who would have 50 abstruse, rather boring, and highly rarefied intellectual books on the shelf, I'm not sure what the use of that is. But I do say this, and I don't know West well enough to know whether or not this is true or not true about him. If you're going to be a quote-unquote intellectual, I think there's a certain hunger. You want to know new stuff. And the question that I would always ask somebody is, what are you doing now or thinking now that you weren't 5 years ago? What new thing have you been eating up? What new direction? And sometimes I wonder with some people whether they would have anything to say. You know, 5 years ago you were doing this. Here it is 5 years later. What's the new thing that kind of grabbed you? And then certainly 5 years after that. And if you're not hungry in that way, if you're kind of just sitting in one routine and saying the same thing, then I do have certain questions as to what sort of heavy-duty Harvard sort of university professor you're supposed to be. And opinions will differ. But I do wonder about that hunger. And it is disappointing when someone like that is put forth as cream of the crop. I hate saying this. Cream of the crop of the black academic intellectuals if they can't really put up. Yes, I would have to agree with your wife after these 10 years, and I've been very reluctant to even engage in it, but lately it's been hard not to. Don't you feel bad having to think about this at all, though? It makes me sad.
You know, this is very kind of delicate. I mean, because there's the reflexive aspect of it. You know, physician, heal thyself. In other words, if I'm going to criticize Cornel West for not writing enough philosophy books, what am I doing on blogging heads or writing op-ed pieces?
One does both.
Or you know, whatever, when I should be churning out economics research articles. So there's that. There's also the fact that Cornel is not the only person who against whom this kind of criticism could be brought.
By no means.
Other very prominent people. You could say Henry Louis Gates Jr. making documentary films for PBS isn't exactly scholarship. And you could ask, when's the last serious piece of literary criticism that he produced? This is the chairman of Afro at Harvard University. And if you were to ask that, I assume that he could answer with a long litany of accomplishments that he's in projects, that he's brought to completion, in anthologies that he's edited, and dictionary of Negro biography projects he's undertaken, and Encyclopedia Africana that he's completed, and all kinds of programs at Harvard. He would have a very, 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 very long list. Okay, and so now you're into this thing where people say, "What you said, Gates is not distinguished," because he didn't produce the same kind of books that whoever the literary, equivalent of 35 years ago, the white guy, the Jewish guy, or whatever, would have produced.
Say Richard Rorty would be a good comparison.
It's a difficult thing. And I must say that I, at a personal level, have often experienced this division, this sense of being torn. between I'm not spending enough time, working on hard math modeling of economic phenomena, looking at my CV and, it doesn't have enough recently published top 5 journal, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm on in years a little bit now. I'm 62 years old. I've been doing this for 30, 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm comfortable that I'm a good economist, that I've got the accolades to show for it. But even so, I can never stop looking over my shoulder, wondering whether or not my peers really respect me. And then there are, of course, the jealousies that come up where people whose intellectual angle of vision only has about a 15 or 10 degree distinction because they only do one thing.
Sure.
See you on television, see you quoted in the newspaper, see that your book was reviewed in New York Review of
You're
Books.
not real.
So, now you're not doing the real thing. You're a popularizer. Right. You're whatever. Right. So there's all this weird, small stuff that also goes on. Perhaps we should not be too hard on Brother West and his...
The academic realm can be highly unsatisfying. I think it's part of why both of us do the other things that we do. I wrote an academic book on linguistics that I put blood, sweat, and tears into. It was called Language Interrupted, Signs of Non-Native Acquisition in Standard Language Grammar's Blood, Sweat, and Tears. No one's read it. Because it's an academic book, and people don't have time, and the New York Times...
Well, we should link to it at the Blogging Heads site so that the Blogging Heads readers should
so that one more person will read it. And, doing the academic articles, peer-reviewed, and you put them in there, and let's face it, our colleagues are busy. Nobody reads the thing from beginning to end. And for me, that was never enough. As gratifying as it is to do academic work, my thought was, I am not going to retire in my 60s having done only that, because people don't pay enough attention to it, even if you're pretty prominent in your area, and I'm not exactly obscure in linguistics either, and that's not just for the pop stuff, but it's just not enough. But then there's the other extreme, where it's hard to say that you're really being what is called an academic or an intellectual, and I'm not sure where you put it. With Gates, one thing I've always thought about him is that he would pass the 5-year test, so he's not doing refereed work to my knowledge, but with the pop stuff that he does, he's always on to something new. I detect a kind of a hunger in him for new things. Whereas with some other people, they really are held up as academic intellectuals, and yet what they put out there seems never to be on that level and hasn't been since they were much younger people. And questions do arise. It's a weird topic, but yes, questions arise at this point.
Yeah, it's
I didn't think we were going to talk about that, but it does need to be talked about. It definitely needs to be talked about because... Since we're on it, I want to add one more thing. I don't like the idea of younger black scholars having any kind of internalized notion that if you're black and an academic, then you're not responsible for what white academics are responsible for. So, for example, and I mentioned this to you before in a private conversation, Manning Marable, the scholar at Columbia University, black scholar who had the unfortunately posthumously published biography of Malcolm X, and he had a joint appointment in history and Afro-American studies and something else. A heavy-duty black intellectual at Columbia. I heard an obituary story for him on All Things Considered on National Public Radio, where at one point, and I'm sure this is partly because of the editing, at one point, one of his graduate students was pointing to all of the files and folders that there were in his office, with the idea being that it was impressive that this scholar had lots of files and folders on the subject that they were studying. If academics have files and folders, they have these things because that's what you do. And there was a sense that I got from it, the idea was showing, boy, he was a serious scholar. He had folders and files, and they were stacked up. I couldn't help wondering if anybody would say that if the scholar who had died was someone like Alan Dershowitz or, Lord forbid, Steve Pinker or someone like that. Of course they have files. It just worries me that there's this subtly different sense that we have of what it means to be a black, serious intellectual, and that has worried me for a long time.
That's another one of my wife Linda's concerns, that it's a bad model to the younger generation about what it takes to succeed in the academy, to think that you can kind of bluff your way through by
charisma,
a lot of this kind of public stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, John, I think we've kind of exhausted this topic, or we reach a point perhaps where it is convenient and not graceless for us to discontinue our conversation.
That is probably true. And so why don't we call it an end for today?
All right.
And
agreed. Good talking to you.
We shall
and
continue.
let's do it again soon.
Wonderful. Good night, Glenn.